Hello, everyone, and welcome to Petite Queen's Claim Your Career Crown podcast. I'm your host, Lynn, and today I'm joined by our special guest, Sabrina Guler. And today we're going to be talking about one important trick to maintain a growth mindset when starting a business. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about Sabrina. She is a 29-year-old female entrepreneur in the real estate space who co-founded Techvestor, a short-term rental fund that raised $40 million in the last 12 months. I mean, woohoo, that's a lot. Before Techvestor, Sabrina worked at Apple in the engineering space as a project manager for the AirPods product line, while helping thousands of people in tech learn about real estate investing. Since 2021, she has flipped, designed, and furnished over 65 homes, built Techvestor's operational infrastructure, and been nominated for Forbes 30 Under 30 2023. Sabrina, I'm very excited to welcome you to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I am really excited to dive into this. I mean, you've accomplished such a great deal at such a young age. But before we get started, for anyone who's tuning in for that very first time, make sure you don't miss a single episode by subscribing to Claim Your Career Crown wherever you get your podcasts. And while we're on the subject, please take another second. And if you love the show and you love what we're doing, leave us a 5-star review. We would very much appreciate it. Okay, Sabrina, you have such a great backstory and where you're at right now, but what inspired you to get started and to shift from what you were doing at Apple and to build your own business?
Yeah, such a loaded question. I think a lot of things motivated me over a long period of time. I don't think I woke up one day and I was like, I'm ready to quit this. I mean, I had a pretty good setup at Apple. I loved the team that I worked on. And at the time, like pre-COVID, it's kind of all I knew. I had a pretty hefty commute. And my role was focused on some really great products. At the time, I focused on AirPods, but I didn't know that my time could be spent in other places. I could be with family. I did not have to make that crazy commute. And COVID kind of, opened that level of awareness for me. I think because I was living in San Francisco, my rent was really high. I mean, the average rent in San Francisco has to be over $3,000. And that's kind of what I was paying, which is crazy. And when COVID hit, I called my mom. My parents live in Phoenix in Arizona. And at the time, the rent and the properties were still like pretty good. They were priced pretty well. Phoenix hadn't exploded yet. And my mom was like, you should just come here and spend some time here. And when I got here, I was like, wow, the weather's really good. The rent is super cheap. People are happy. The commute, right? And I really started thinking about it because, I'm born and raised in New York. I've been a city girl my whole life. I've lived in really big cities. And there's a certain element that comes with that. Seattle's a big city. I have friends that have lived in those pockets, just coming from a tech background. There's many benefits to that. But I think when you take the people out of it, at the end of the day, quality of life is super important. So that's really what pushed me, was quality of life, time, spending time with family. And also another thing too, I think during COVID, a lot of people questioned what they were doing. Like, why am I commuting? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? And for me, it was a time to really question things. I questioned everything. I questioned my fitness routine, my diet, so being in Arizona was kind of like this double life that I was living in parallel to what my day job was in San Francisco. And that's ultimately what pushed me to get into another career.
Okay, wow, that's amazing. And what's I'm curious about is really about Techvestor. And if you could tell us a little bit about that and really the backbone of building that business.
Yeah. So Techvestor actually started. So I'll take a step back. During my exploratory phase here in Phoenix, I bought 2 small properties, and my intention was to buy them, furnish them, put them on Airbnb, when I'm not here with my parents. Cause I thought, oh, it could be a second house. I could be here when I come visit my parents for the holidays, and then I'll just go back to San Francisco. Well, I never went back to San Francisco. Like I just never went back. And that's what started, at least, my interest in Airbnb and how the whole business worked. So I furnished those two properties. I put them on Airbnb and I did really, really well. I think the first property I ever bought was 145 grand, which everyone listening is going to scoff at that because those opportunities don't currently exist anymore here in that market. But at the time it existed, I purchased that property. And my first year I did I think it was around 43 grand in gross rental income, which is really good for that purchase price. And I just remember being like, why aren't people talking about this or doing this as a business? I mean, you have a lot of random people doing it, like Joe who rents his basement and someone who rents their little ADU outside their home. I think Seattle has a lot of ADUs. But yeah, so I was really curious. I was like, I want to make this into a business because I've done it well a couple times by myself. And I was documenting it with people at Apple. So Apple has this internal investor club. It's just people who work for Apple full time, and they talk about investments and other things amongst employees. And so I was sharing with people like, hey, I'm working from home in Phoenix, with my parents, and this is what I'm doing. And people were like, oh, we want to be a part of this. So I did a lot of joint ventures with employees, and then it got to the point where people were curious about each other's joint ventures. They were like, well, wait a minute, you got that market and you got this house, and people were curious. And I was like, well, I might need to open this up and make it into some kind of a fund where people can benefit off of a blend of houses. And that's when I actually met my business partner. We had known each other through the grapevine. He worked at Facebook for a while, and we didn't live very far from each other. And he found me actually on social media talking about this because I started to really put this out there. I was like, I'm trying to learn as much as possible. And this was a total hobby for me. I mean, it was side income, but it was not topping Apple anywhere close to what I was making at Apple. And at the time we put our heads together and we were like, let's try and turn this into a business. No one's doing it. It has great returns. People are definitely interested. I mean, the interest is probably what pushed the business into taking action and actually start buying properties and all that, because there was such a high interest coming from people who were curious, but they didn't want to do the work. I think Airbnb is not a passive investment. It is not. It is an active investment. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of data and things that are involved, especially now. There's such an oversaturation with Airbnb. So it was a great way for people to get into this without doing it themselves. And also, a lot of people who were in our worlds, like San Francisco or Seattle or LA, who worked in tech, they couldn't buy property there because it's so expensive. And those cities have high regulations for laws regarding short-term rentals. So again, long answer, but that's how Techvestor was born.
Wow. Okay. So, when for the business of Techvestor, I'd love to hear more about how it works and, how you do what you do, and if you have some kind of a process.
Yeah. So, how it works. So on the back end, so we buy all single family homes. That's our model. We buy 3 to 6 bedrooms, I would say, on average. Our sweet spot's really the 4 to 5. We are in 9 markets. I think we might be in 10 at this point, but we're in about 10 markets all over the country. And we buy in those markets specifically for the stability of short-term rental income and the yield it produces. So our fund on average produces anywhere between an 8 to 12% cash on cash per year. And our markets that we buy in are a blend to produce that number. We buy all of our homes in-house. So that means that we have a team that is constantly looking at Zillow and Redfin and all the, off-market deals, wholesale. We look at all properties around the country that could be a fit for that. And then we have a data team that studies, oversaturated markets and how to really do well and how to produce the revenue that we're underwriting for. For example, If you buy in Scottsdale, you need a heated pool. You absolutely need a hot tub. You need amenities in your backyard. You really need amenities to pull the revenue. And so we have a team that just studies those things all day long. I run everything operational in our business. So as soon as a house goes under contract, I'm looking at inspection reports. I'm looking at the longevity of the home, how we plan on putting some love into it so that it appreciates over a 5 to 8 year, lifespan. We furnish everything in-house. We design everything in-house. We put the property on the market. And then we also have our property management in-house. We did that for many reasons. It wasn't intentional in the beginning, but we decided it was just best for us to really control the management of all the properties. And then the overall return of those properties blended together is what produces the funds return, and it gets distributed on a quarterly basis and back to our investors.
Okay, well, that sounds terrific. And you have built an awful lot of infrastructure and putting this all together. So Sabrina, we're talking about growth mindset for this topic. So for you, where did that kick in? Where did you need to really lean into growth mindset to start your own business and the success that you've had?
I have failed probably like 20 times. I mean, I've like probably more than that, if I'm being honest with you. I've never been afraid of fear. I've never been afraid of trying things. I've always been a very curious person. Curiosity is definitely what has honestly led me into a lot of things. Even back from my career at Apple. And I like to say that because if you look at like me on paper, I sound like this person who's accomplished a lot, and I have to some degree for sure, but I also have failed 10 times more than what I've accomplished. I'm also 100% self-made. So I didn't grow up with parents who went to schools or really with a lot of money as a kid, but I've always been curious. Like I think if I were to say two things, it comes down to being super persistent. I don't like hearing no. And to be honest with you, if I do get a no for whatever reason, I've received many no's. I always like to understand why. So I think why has taught me many things, and it honestly either secures the door for me so that I get closure from something and I can open many other doors and move on to other paths, or it just allows me to get better and try again. So a great example is with Apple. I think I had 14 failed interviews, and on my 15th one, I got the job, right? And that's because I had no engineering background, going to school. And I really was just very street smart and very sales focused in my interviews. So I think that's what makes me, but there's so many growth hacks and growth, pieces of advice that it can hand to someone.
Okay, so let's talk about that with the people that, certainly you've worked with and that are around you now and in your past. I mean, what are some things that hold them back, and are some growth mindset activities that they could participate in or take part in that would help them move forward?
So I think a lot of times, like, we know what we want to do, whether it's like maybe to move from a job or get into a hobby or start content creation or lose weight, like whatever it is, we kind of know what we want to do, but we get stuck in like our daily cycle of like walking the dog, picking up the kids, getting things last minute. And then before you know it, it's 8 p.m. and you're like, I just want to watch TV. I don't want to do any of that. And I'd say something that I do, and something I routinely do, like every 90-ish days, every 90 to 180-ish days, I do this, where I actually write down what I want. I write down how to get to that, like action steps to get to that. And then I try to clear, honestly, just empty, non-ROI producing things in my schedule. And I try to replace those things with stuff on that list. And even if I just get started with like something, the tiniest thing, the smallest habit, it has always snowballed for me. And then you kind of realize like, God, I could have just taken a step. You don't have to do everything, but you could have just taken one step to start and at least learn. And so that's the biggest thing, at least if you want to be action focused and you kind of feel like you haven't been growing and you're stuck.
No, I agree. Taking that one step to move you forward, and you can take baby steps to get to where you're going. Most people sort of like, whatever it is, riding a bike. Nobody just jumped on a bike and started riding it. You start with a tricycle and then you get the little bike with the training wheels, right? And then you finally get the training wheels off and you do get the skin chin in my case, but I still kept getting on that bike, but it was baby steps to get there. And that incremental movement of taking some part of action towards that goal. I love that piece of advice, is to write down where you want to get to, and then what are the things that you're going to need to have in place to get there. I really appreciate that. So Sabrina, one final parting word, if you had for our audience, is something that they should take action on, or take a look at today, tomorrow, or this next week.
Yeah. Another thing that I've been focusing on personally are things that I'm resistant towards in my life. So if I'm like, that feeling when you have to go to the gym and you don't want to, you feel that like level of resistance. I've been teaching people to just lean into it. There's usually a lesson behind that, or there's momentum behind that. And for some reason you're avoiding it. So at least if you get to write down what you've been resistant toward is step one. You'd be surprised how many little things that you're pushing against subconsciously. And when you write those things down, at least you become aware of those things. And as your week goes on, maybe you'll, have the inclination to act and you'll get some momentum. So definitely listen to what you're resistant towards, create awareness around that, and hopefully take some action.
All right. That's once again, a terrific piece of advice. And through those activities of the different growth mindset activities, you actually can move yourself from where you are to where you want to be. So Sabrina, thank you so much for sharing one important trick to maintaining a growth mindset when starting a business. And if you will share with our listeners, I know that they're going to want to know more about you and where they can find you.
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always on there. I'm pretty active. And then you can read more about what we do at techvestor.com.
Okay. And we'll make sure that those links are below so that Sabrina is one click away. Sabrina, thank you so much. This has been really fascinating discussion about your journey and how you got to where you are. And for those of you who tuned in, if you have any ideas or you'd like to leave us a comment, we love hearing from you. You can leave those right down below. And if you have a question or would like to suggest a specific topic for discussion, you can email us at jointheconversation@petitetoqueen.com. To stay current on all our insightful advice, our breakthrough advantages, sign up for our weekly wisdoms at petitetoqueen.com. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And Sabrina, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.